Welcome back to Troubleshooting Agile. Hi there, Jeffrey.
Hi, Squirrel. Squirrel, I'm going to be direct with you this week, which is you sent me an article about Crocker's rules, and I want you to tell people what those are and why you sent it to me.
Excellent. I'd be happy to. And Jeffrey is being a very good example of following Crocker's rules. Now, Crocker's rules appear to me to be only one rule, so I'm not quite sure. Maybe we can find Mr. Crocker. He's a real person. So maybe if he listens to the podcast or any of our listeners know him, just ask him, what are the other rules? Because I only know one. But the rule is that you skip the sort of extra noise that people put in front of things they want to tell other people. So Jeffrey might have said, "Hey, Squirrel, I'm really glad you're back from Portugal. I hope you had a great time. Are you getting ready for Helsinki? I'm going to travel soon. Is it a sunny day over there? Okay, I'm looking forward to our podcast. Let's go." And the 20 seconds of saying all that stuff doesn't add anything to getting started with our podcast. And Crocker's rule says if you invite someone to follow Crocker's rules with you, then what you are doing is telling that person, in this case Jeffrey, to speak without all that stuff and just give me the raw information without the additional data about your feelings and your thoughts and what happened to you at breakfast.
That's right. And I think what there's two things here that we are talking about. One is the article that you sent, and then it had linked to Crocker's rules. And the thing that I resonated with me about it was it got into some examples, and also I think I like the title of the article, which is "I beg you to follow Crocker's rules, even if you will be rude to me." And what it got into there, what I appreciated was it was talking about, and I like this phrase, noisy politeness. And it gave a few examples, but the one that resonated with me is like what I experienced many times is someone wants to message you on something like Slack or Teams or something like that. They have a question for you. And what they do is they start with sending you a message that says something like, "Hi," and then it stops. And they wait. And it's sort of like
And then you say hi back, but they keep going.
yeah, exactly. And then eventually maybe there's a few exchanges and you get back to, oh yeah, so I had a question about X, Y, and Z, and we get to what the subject really was. Um, I would find that very annoying. But the thing reminded me of, even as I was talking through that, in the case of the article, it's saying, look, don't do that. Even if you think you're being rude, rather, I prefer you just be direct. But it also made me think about what you tell people about your Squirrel phone, which you have for your consultants. Because remember, you told me that part of your onboarding to people is to kind of walk them through your version of this, right?
Exactly. Well, I teach them to use a phone because everyone has forgotten how telephones work. What they think you have to do first, there's some kind of anti-Crocker's rule that says you have to send an email and then a text and then an invite and then a carrier pigeon, and then you're allowed to talk to the person. And my version of Crocker's rule is, hey, if you're going to phone the Squirrel phone, just call it. You can just push the buttons and talk to Squirrel. Those are all the steps.
Yeah, that's right. It's suitable for you to be sending this, given that you onboard it. But I think we're kind of missing what I think is the interesting essence of Crocker's rules. Like I sort of like these reduction of overhead, but the essence of Crocker's rules, and I like this, is it says that to say you're operating under Crocker's rules is a discipline, not a privilege. It's if I'm operating Crocker's rules, I'm not saying I'm going to be rude to other people. What I'm telling other people, they don't need to worry about being rude to me. That essentially I am, and I like this as a quote, I am taking responsibility for the functioning of my own mind. And therefore, I'm saying I'm not going to be sensitive and offended if you're telling me things that you believe to be true. Even if it sounds like, Jeff, you were really a jerk in that meeting, and the thing you said, it was probably the stupidest thing I ever heard, and blah blah blah. And you don't need to worry about how you putting it into sort of a nicely digested package for me. I'm saying I want the information. I care enough about the information that I will do the work of unpacking it, and you don't need to worry about trying to, put it up in an easily digestible package for me. And in that way, you can be direct and speak with a way that is maximally informative, and I will deal with any of the aftermath in my own head, and you don't need to worry about it. I think that's a very interesting framing. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I have two at least. One is that actually I read the article, which is on the LR0 blog. I'm not sure who the person is behind this blog, but that person actually argues two different things, and I find it really interesting. This person says when you are invoking Crocker's rules, i.e., you're saying it's okay to be rude to me, you, the other person, the person who's originating the message, might have some feelings about how I, the person invoking Crocker's rules, might receive it. That you might be worried about me being offended. You might be concerned that I won't understand you, or that you'll be too direct. And Crocker's rules also says that's your problem. So the originator gets an emotional problem to manage, i.e., how's the other person going to hear it? Is it going to be a problem for me? Are they going to be upset with me when I tell them this? And the person receiving it is explicitly saying, I'm going to be able to deal with whatever you tell me, even if you tell me I was a jerk in the meeting.
Yeah.
Both of you got that emotional maturity at both ends, which I think is tricky for lots of people, which is why they do this process. Argyris called it easing in, with all this sort of noisy politeness. So that was my first thought. How does that strike you, Jeffrey?
It makes sense. I guess I looked at it as like I can't force the other person. I can say I'm operating in Crocker's rules. I can only say that for myself.
Yeah, that's
And
true. But you are also asking the other person to do some emotional management when you ask them to follow Crocker's rules.
I guess I maybe that's true. Maybe I'm not focusing on it. I looked at it more as a reassurance. I can say, look, I'm operating Crocker's rules. Just speak to me as directly as, and I would say, as you're comfortable with. And maybe I'm missing that. Like I don't think it's a demand, and maybe I misunderstood it to
Mm,
be
yeah.
minimally terse. And there's a
No, that's
subtlety
true.
there.
Good point. You're inviting them to have this level of management, but if they can't manage it, you're probably not going to be upset with them. You might be slightly confused if they start doing lots of easing in because you
That's
just
right.
invited them not to, but you're not demanding it. That's a good point. There's
Yeah.
another point in the article, and I found the article really fascinating. We'll link to both. There's a very brief definition of Crocker's rules. I think it might be from Mr. Crocker, but there's also this article about it, which is where I found it. And that in that article, there's a statement I don't agree with. There's something I think is an incorrect analysis of Crocker's rules. And the sentence is the fact that you were stressed, or that you had inherited the config from someone else, whatever the thing is that went wrong, the config, or that the documentation was unclear, or that you asked your lead and they said it was probably fine. None of that is relevant to the incident report. Again, this person's reporting on a problem. And I don't agree about that. When I read the incident report, I think it's really useful, valuable information which could be delivered directly. That you had insufficient time, it was 3 a.m, you were exhausted, nobody had explained it to you, the documentation was unclear. I want to hear all of that in the incident report. I also want to hear a clear and bold statement. This number should have been 12 and it was actually 200, and that caused this problem. I don't want that to be mixed up with a whole bunch of noisy politeness. But I also want a clear and direct statement. Nobody explained this to me. It was 3 a.m, and I was really stressed after a long day. Because
Yeah.
that leads me to things I can do in a root cause analysis that might change all of those factors, as well as the number being wrong.
Yeah. It's interesting because reading that I can see it both ways, and I'm glad you made the clarification that I was going to make the same, which is to have that kind of bare technical, here's the mechanical thing that went wrong, uh, as the direct cause of the incident. I want to have that called out because I have seen places where all of the context, there's so much discussion of the context and the situation that it's very difficult to parse out, well, but what actually happened? And I've seen some instances where, in fact, people don't know. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't do the time to investigate what the actual direct cause was, and said it's all context. They've talked about their stories and everything else, but they never actually did the investigation to say concretely, we know it was this problem. In fact, that was such a problem that when we had some amount of root cause analysis where people would have the incident report and to be reviewing it, and they would be say like, well, we don't actually have the actual a direct cause here to discuss everything else. And so the proximate cause, that's what I was looking for. Um, and we ended up adding a step that before we got in the room to kind of talk about what we might do to prevent this in the future, which needs to understand the full context. We had to make sure that there had been what we call a technical analysis to say what actually was the direct cause. Because people would often omit it or have it be very unclear, buried in everything else. So I have some sympathy for that line, based on my past experience.
And I'm just saying, I would like direct information about the other person's feelings and thoughts and issues and stressors and everything else. I'd like that just as directly. They don't need to surround it with politeness, but I think that's valuable data. It's data that you can deliver in a very direct way. And I'll give you an example of that, a couple of examples. One is that I'm always coaching people to give what is described in a book called The 1 Minute Manager as 1 minute reprimands. And 1 minute reprimands are very brief, very direct. They follow Crocker's rules. And part of delivering the reprimand, telling the person that they screwed up, is telling them about your feeling about how they screwed up. Because that carries a huge amount of important information. Were you annoyed? Were you irritated? Were you terrified? What is the emotion that you had when you observed the person make the mistake? And if it's a mistake in a nuclear power plant, you might be terrified and angry. If it's a mistake in configuration of a web server, you might be irritated and disappointed. Those are very different, and communicating that information in a direct way is very helpful. That's why the 1 Minute Manager talks about doing all the feedback in 1 minute. And I have an example of doing that recently, where I have a manager who's been performing poorly, and I didn't use Crocker's rules, but I explicitly agreed with that manager that I would be very hard on them because they're just really not where they need to be, and the person said, I want to improve. Guess what? That person has improved a lot since I started in a Crocker's rules style, telling that person not only how I was feeling, but also what they were screwing up and exactly how, and exactly what they should do about it, and their team's doing better too. So 2 examples there, one generic, one specific, of applying Crocker's rules to get significant improvement.
I think there's something important that stands out. And in that short definition of Crocker's rules, one of the things they said is that 2 people who are following Crocker's rules, because remember, you're following it for yourself, but where both are operating Crocker's rules and they each respect the other person's decision to do so, can convey the relevant information in a minimum period of time. And I think that this gets to kind of the goal, I think, of why the people were bringing Crocker's rules up, which is that how do we maximize the amount of information per unit time? And as I hear you describe that, wanting all that context, it's part of the relevant information. And I think you can make a distinction here about when someone says, well, it was very late and I was tired and there's no handover. And I think there's a difference about interpreting that as relevant information and context for the problem happening, and alternatively about it being about saving face. And that phrase came to mind from the mutual learning and unilateral control models, which we've talked about a lot, that from Chris Argyris. And the thing about the unilateral control is that one of its operating values is to save face for self and others. And so I think that what this is,
and
in
to be
Crocker's
clear, we
rules,
don't like that. We'd
yeah.
prefer not to save face. We think it would be, we're advising our listeners not to.
Yeah, exactly. And so in that sense, Crocker's rules is kind of a pithy version of the values of the mutual learning model, which is focused more on learning and relevant information, and less on saving face. They understand that the attempts to save face can actually harm trust and mutual respect, and as well as being less effective. So it was interesting in you describing it. It very strongly brought back to me those values of the mutual learning model versus the values of the unilateral control model.
For sure. Okay, well, so now we have a nice sort of set of rules, although it seems still to be only one rule that our listeners can use when they want to get to relevant information fast and without the sort of obfuscation that comes in from the noisy politeness that often gets in the way or even prevents you getting the information at all, as Jeffrey referred to. So we'd be really interested in how listeners apply Crocker's rules themselves. I gave you an example where I'd been doing it without knowing it, and I wonder, are any of our listeners doing that? Are our
Although
listeners
Squirrel, can I
finding
call
that
you on
they're...
that before we close?
Yeah, go ahead.
I want, this is like a ad hoc. I don't. You were not following Crocker's rules. The person you were talking to was following Crocker's rules. Crocker's rules is about how you react. It's not about how you talk.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, I didn't refer to it in my conversation with the person. We were not explicitly using Crocker's rules in our conversation, but what I could have done is said, "Hey, I'm going to have you follow." Let's see.
I'm
We are
inviting
going
you.
to use Crocker's
Are
rules.
you willing?
Yeah.
Are you willing to follow Crocker's rules? Can you take the truth?
Yes.
I think that it's
Exactly. That's the point. Yeah.
And that's the point. And that's why I thought like, hey, this is a great chance. I can interrupt you directly and say,
Yeah,
Squirrel, I
correct
think
it.
you're wrong on this.
That's
Because
very helpful.
exactly, that's the point. It's started helpful. Yeah. So
Indeed.
there you go.
So if our listeners are applying Crocker's rules without knowing it, or maybe doing them backwards like I just did, or if they think, hey, wait a minute, that wouldn't work with my boss, right? I've got to be much more face-saving and easing in with my boss. That's important for me. Or any other situation where you think it might not work. We're always interested in people who agree with us and disagree with us. You don't need any noisy politeness. You can send us a brief email or a message on X or Twitter or whatever it's called, or LinkedIn or lots of other places. The way to find all of that stuff is at agileconversations.com, where you'll find our book, Agile Conversations, and information on running a conversational dojo to practice these techniques, including Crocker's rules, and lots of other free material that we like to give away because we like talking to people about these topics. Another thing you can do is come to Helsinki in the end of the end of May, and we'll include that in the show notes because it's a chance to meet both of us in person at the KitCon conference. So we'd love to see you there. That's another way to keep in touch with us. And the last one, of course, as always, is to come back again next week when we'll have another episode of Troubleshooting Agile. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Squirrel.